Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, you're going to learn absolutely everything you need to know to understand and graph a price floor. We're going to cover producer surplus, consumer surplus, deadweight loss, and all the calculations you need to know. With that said, let's get into it. So for this problem, we're going to be given three pieces of information and we'll calculate and solve for everything else. What we're going to be given is the demand equation, the supply equation, and the price floor. So let's store these pieces of information on our screen for later. The first thing we're going to do is plot the original supply and demand equations. So I have my two axes. I'm going to label them price and quantity. Again, price is my vertical axis, quantity is my horizontal axis. I'm going to draw my generic supply and demand curves, which I'm going to label with a point of intersection right here where we are in equilibrium. Speaking of equilibrium, we need to actually calculate for that. And remember, we calculate for equilibrium where the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. And that means I can just set these two equations equal to each other. So quantity demanded's equation is 100 minus P, and it's equal to quantity supplied's equation, which is P minus 20. Now collecting all of my like terms, so putting P on the right and the constants on the left, I get 100 plus 20 is equal to P plus P, which simplifies to 120 is equal to 2P, and then finally dividing both sides by 2, I get P is equal to $60. Now that I know my equilibrium price, I can substitute it into the supply or the demand equation. It doesn't actually matter which one because it'll give me the same Q value. I'm actually going to substitute it into both so you can see that it gives you the same Q value no matter what. You can't mess this up. So if I sub it into the demand equation, I get 100 minus 60. And if I substitute it into the supply equation, I get 60 minus 20. But you can see that no matter which one I use, it's going to give me an equilibrium Q value of 40. And this is 40 units of whatever the good is in this market. So now that I have my equilibrium P and Q, I'm going to put them on my graph. And I'm going to solve for my next thing, which is my consumer surplus. Now remember, consumer surplus on the graph is the area under the demand curve and above the selling price. So in this case, the selling price is 60. I just calculated it, and that means that this triangle right here is my consumer surplus. Now producer surplus, on the other hand, is the area above the supply curve and below the selling price. Well, again, the selling price is still 60, so that area is represented right here. This is the producer surplus. Now, in order to calculate the area of these two triangles, I actually need these two values here. These are my intercepts. Let's calculate the top one first. You'll see that it's actually the demand curve's p-intercept. It's where the demand curve intersects with the price axis. So let me pull up the demand curve once again, 100 minus p. Now, at the p-intercept, I know that the q value is 0, because again, this is intercepting the y-axis, and for all y-intercepts, the x value must be 0. So in this case, I substitute in the quantity as 0, and I solve for p. And if I do this, I get 0 is equal to 100 minus p, and of course, you can isolate for p and find that p is equal to 100. In this case, the unit is dollars. Now I can do the same thing for the supply curve intercept. So here I have the supply equation, p minus 20. I'm once again going to substitute in a Q value of 0 because it's the y-intercept, or in this case, the price intercept. So 0 is equal to P minus 20. And then finally, isolating for P, I get price is equal to $20. Now I'm going to take these two values and I'm going to substitute them in onto my graph as well. Well, now I have enough information to actually go ahead and calculate consumer and producer surplus. So let me start with consumer surplus. Once again, it's the area of that triangle. So it's consumer surplus is equal to half times base times height. And the base and height of the triangle are actually shown. The base is right here. It's the distance from the origin to 40, which of course is 40. And then the height of the triangle is right here. It's the distance between 60 and 100, which is also 40. So I'm going to substitute in those values, and that's going to give me half 40 times 40. Well, half of 40 is just 20, so I get consumer surplus is 20 times 40. And finally, consumer surplus is $800. Again, the unit for consumer and producer surplus is always the same unit as price, and in this case, it's dollars. Now I'm going to do the same thing for producer surplus. Again, it's the area of a triangle, so half base times height. The base of the triangle is right here. It's the distance between the origin and 40, so it is also 40. And again, the height is the distance between 20 and 60, which happens to be 40 as well. So I'll take these values and I'll substitute them in. That's going to give me producer surplus is half times 40 times 40. And again, half times 40 is 20, so the next line is producer surplus is 20 times 40, and finally the producer surplus is also 800. How convenient. So these are all of my values before the price floor is implemented. My original equilibrium price is 60, my original equilibrium quantity traded in the market is 40, my original consumer surplus is 800, and my original producer surplus is 800 as well. Now let's take a look at what happens when the government imposes a price floor. Now the price floor amount we're using in this video is $70, so that is above the equilibrium price. Well, the price floor acts like a minimum price that will be charged, so it has to be above the equilibrium price in order to be binding. Because if the price floor was below the equilibrium price, well, people would just trade at the equilibrium price anyway, because the price floor is just the minimum, not the maximum. So as you can see, it's above the equilibrium price, and therefore it will have impacts on the market. And so now you'll see we have a new shape for our producer surplus, consumer surplus, and we've got this new triangle as well. And you'll also see that since we are no longer in equilibrium, we have an intersection of the price line with both curves at two different values. And I've got it noted on the bottom as QD and QS. Now you can see that quantity demanded is less than quantity supplied. That will always happen in the case of a price floor, which is going to lead to a surplus. We'll talk about that later. First, let's see what the quantity demanded and quantity supplied in this price floor scenario will be. So let's learn how to do this. I'm going to take my demand equation first, and I'm going to substitute in the new p-value for the price floor, which is 70. So I have 100 minus 70. Well, of course, that's just 30. So the quantity demanded when the price is 70 is just 30. Let's take a look at what that looks like for the supply side. Well, quantity supplied is equal to P minus 20, and in this case, price is 70, so 70 minus 20 is 50. And so I'm going to substitute those in onto my graph, and you'll see that we're no longer in equilibrium, and we have two different quantities. We have quantity demanded and quantity supplied, which are different values. Now, in this scenario of disequilibrium, this is any point where you're not in equilibrium, which in this case, clearly we're not, then the lesser of the two values will be traded. So in this case, quantity demanded is less than quantity supplied. So even though there's all those extra units, there's 20 extra units available, they won't be purchased because demand is too low. So the quantity traded in the market will be 30 in this case. And so let's take a look at the new consumer and producer surplus values. So once again, you can see the consumer surplus is a triangle, but it's a little bit smaller this time. So consumer surplus is half base times height, but this time the base is the distance between the origin and 30, and the height is the distance between 70 and 100. So now we have consumer surplus is equal to half times 30 times 30. Half of 30 is just 15, so consumer surplus is 15 times 30, which equates to a value of $450. This is significantly less than it was before the price floor was implemented. So the consumers end up losing a lot in this situation. Let's take a look at what happens for the producers. Well, the producers now have this weird compound shape, and there is a way to solve it if you know a little bit about integrals and calculus, but I'm going to assume for this video that you don't, and I'm just going to show you how to solve it with some simple algebra and geometry. So you can see that this area can be divided up into a rectangle and a triangle, and we're just going to calculate the area of those individually and then add them up. So the producer surplus is equal to half times base times height, that's the area of the triangle, and I'm going to add base times height, which is the area of the rectangle. Now in order to calculate those areas, I actually need this little intersection point where you see the dotted line. In order to calculate that, I'm just going to take my quantity of 30 and I'm going to substitute it into the supply curve. So again, the supply equation is quantity supplied is equal to P minus 20. I'm going to substitute in 30 because that's the quantity at that particular point. So 30 is equal to P minus 20, and then rearranging, I get 30 plus 20 equals P, and finally P is equal to 50. So this 50 is going to go right here, and that's going to help me in my calculation. Now I can see that the base of my triangle is right here, and it also happens to be the base of my rectangle, and the height of my triangle is right here, it's 30, and the height of my rectangle is right here, it's 20. And once again, those values are just taking the difference between 50 and 20 and 70 and 50. Now I'm going to take all of those values I've now found, and I'm going to plug them all into my equation. So now I have producer surplus is equal to half times 30 times 30. That's the area of the triangle, plus 30 times 20. That's the area of the rectangle. And if I simplify all of this algebra, I get producer surplus is equal to 450 plus 600. And finally, producer surplus is equal to $1,050. Now you'll notice this is actually higher than the producer surplus was before the price floor was implemented, which is the opposite effect that was happening to consumers. That's an interesting find, But let's take a look at this little yellow triangle right in the middle. The yellow triangle is something called deadweight loss, and deadweight loss is the loss in total surplus when we're not in original equilibrium. So again, we've established that we're not in equilibrium because if we were, we'd be trading at a price of $60 and a quantity of 40 units. But that's not what's happening here. So since we're in disequilibrium, we have this yellow triangle and it's a loss of total surplus, but because it's a triangle, we can also use geometry to solve. Deadweight loss is equal to half times space times height. Well, remember from before, our original equilibrium of the two curves was at 40. So let me put that there so that we can very easily see the base and height of this triangle. If you look at the triangle being on its side, then you would say the height is the distance right here, it's 10, and the base of this triangle is the distance right here, which is 20. So substituting all of these values in, I get deadweight loss is equal to half times 20 times 10. Well, half of 20 is 10, so I get deadweight loss is 10 times 10, which means deadweight loss is $100. But there's another way you could calculate deadweight loss if you're not confident in your geometry skills on this graph, and that's okay. The second way revolves around knowing that deadweight loss is just the change in total surplus. Well, what's total surplus, you might ask? Well, it's just the original consumer surplus plus the original producer surplus minus the consumer surplus after policy plus the producer surplus after policy. Now, maybe you don't want to go back in the video to see what the original values were, so I'm just going to pull them up on screen for a second. The original consumer and producer surplus were both 800. We calculated that a little bit ago. So let's substitute those values in. We also know the new values because they're currently on screen. So let me plug all of them into my equation and solve. Deadweight loss is equal to the original consumer surplus, 800, plus the original producer surplus, 800, minus the new consumer surplus, 450, plus the new producer surplus, which is 1,050. If I simplify this, I get deadweight loss is equal to 1,600 minus 1,500, which of course will still equal 100. So you're able to do this either way, whichever way you're more comfortable with, but it will give you the same answer no matter what. Now let's take a look at a summary of everything we've done so far. So before the price floor was implemented, our equilibrium looked like this. We had an equilibrium price of $60 and 40 units were traded in the market. Consumer and producer surplus were the same at $800. Now, after the price floor was implemented, our graph now looks like this. We have a price of 70 with only 30 units being traded in the market, meaning we have a surplus of 20 units. This means that there's 20 units that are being supplied that are not demanded and therefore will not be traded in the market at a price of $70. We have a consumer surplus of $450, which is lower than the original, and a producer surplus, which is $1,050, which is higher than the original. So here we can see that a price floor benefits producers and hurts consumers. Finally, we have a deadweight loss of $100, meaning that the total economy is worse off because of this distortion from equilibrium. Now, this is a fully labeled and calculated price floor. Once again, to be binding, it must be above the equilibrium price. I know this has been a longer video, so I hope that you found it helpful, and if you did, let us know by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and of course, let us know in the comments section what sort of economic topics or homework questions you'd like to see us cover in the future. Thanks for watching this video. We'll catch you in the next.